Hello, Lady Chatterley's Lover. The continuation of the story of Lady Chatterley's Lover with me, Morel Benard. So, let's continue. Connie was a good deal alone now. Few people came to Rugby. Clifford no longer wanted them. He had turned against even the cronies. He was queer. He preferred the radio, which he had installed at some expense, with a good deal of success at last. He could sometimes get Madrid or Frankfurt, even there in the uneasy Midlands. And he would sit alone for hours listening to the loudspeaker bellowing forth. It amazed and stunned Connie, but there he would sit, with a blank entranced expression on his face, like a person losing his mind, and listen, or seem to listen, to the unspeakable thing. Was he really listening? Or was it a sort of soporific he took, whilst something else worked on underneath in him? Connie did not know. She fled up to a room or out of doors to the wood. A kind of terror filled her sometimes, a terror of the incipient insanity of the whole civilized species. But now that Clifford was drifting off to the other weirdness of industrial activity, becoming almost a creature with a hard, efficient shell of an exterior and a pulpy interior, one of the amazing crabs and lobsters of the modern industrial and financial world, invertebrates of the Cretaceous order, with shells of steel like machines and inner bodies of soft pulp. Connie herself was really completely stranded. She was not even free, for Clifford must have her there. He seemed to have a nervous terror that she would leave him. The curious pulpy part of him, the emotional and humanly individual part, depended on her with terror, like a child, almost like an idiot. She must be there at Rugby, a Lady Chatterley, his wife. Otherwise he would be lost like an idiot on a moor. This amazing dependence, Connie realized, was a sort of horror. She heard him with his pit managers, with the members of his board, with young scientists, and she was amazed at his shrewd insight into things, his power, his uncanny material power over what is called practical men. He had become a practical man himself, with an amazing, astute and powerful one, a master. Connie attributed it to Mrs. Bolton's influence upon him, just at the crisis in his life. But this astute and practical man was almost an idiot when left alone to his own emotional life. He worshipped Connie. She was his wife, a higher being, and he worshipped her with a queer, craven idolatry, like a savage, a worship based on enormous fear and even hate of the power of the idol, the dread idol. All he wanted was for Connie to swear not to leave him, not to give him away. "Clifford," she said to him, but this was after she had the key to the hut, "would you really like me to have a child one day?" He looked at her with a furtive apprehension in his rather prominent pale eyes. "I shouldn't mind if it made no difference between us," he said. "No difference to what?" she asked. "To you and me, to our love for one another. If it's going to affect that, then I'm all against it. Why? I might even one day have a child of my own." She looked at him in amazement. "I mean, it might come back to me one of these days." She still stared in amazement, and he was uncomfortable. "So you would not like it if I had a child?" she said. "I tell you," he replied quickly, like a cornered dog, "I am quite willing, provided it doesn't touch your love for me. If it would touch that, I am dead against it." Connie could only be silent in cold fear and contempt. Such talk was really the gabbling of an idiot. He no longer knew what he was talking about. "Oh, it wouldn't make any difference to my feeling for you," she said, with a certain sarcasm. "There," he said, "that is the point. In that case, I don't mind in the least. I mean, it would be awfully nice to have a child running about the house and feel one was building up a future for it. I should have something to strive for then, and I should know it was your child, shouldn't I, dear? And it would seem just the same as my own, because it is you who count in these matters. You know that, don't you, dear? I don't enter. I'm not a cipher. You are the great I am as far as life goes. You know that, don't you? I mean, as far as I am concerned. I mean, but for you, I am absolutely nothing. I live for your sake and your future. I am nothing to myself." Connie heard it all with deepening dismay and repulsion. It was one of the ghastly half-truths that poison human existence. What man in his senses would say such things to a woman? But men aren't in their senses. What man with a spark of honour would put his ghastly burden of life responsibility upon a woman and leave her there in the void? Moreover, in half an hour's time, Connie heard Clifford talking to Mrs. Bolton in a hot, impulsive voice, revealing himself in a sort of passionless passion to the woman, as if she were half mistress, half foster mother to him. And Mrs. Bolton was carefully dressing him in evening clothes, for there were important business guests in the house. Connie really sometimes felt she would die at this time. She felt she was being crushed to death by weird lies and by the amazing cruelty of idiocy. Clifford's strange business efficiency in a way overawed her, and his declaration of private worship put her into a panic. There was nothing between them. She never even touched him nowadays, and he never touched her. He never even took her hand and held it kindly. No. And because they were so utterly out of touch, he tortured her with his declaration of idolatry. It was the cruelty of utter impotence, and she felt her reason would give way, or she would die. She fled as much as possible to the wood. One afternoon, as she sat brooding, watching the water bubbling coldly in John's well, the keeper had strode up to her. "I got you a key made, my lady," he said, saluting, and he offered her the key. "Thank you so much," she said, startled. "The hut's not very tidy, if you don't mind," he said. "I cleared it what I could." "But I didn't want you to trouble you," she said. "Oh, it wasn't any trouble. I'm setting the hens in about a week, but they won't be scared of you. I'll have to be seen to them morning and night, but I shan't bother you any more than I can help." "But you wouldn't bother me," she pleaded. "I'd rather not go to the hut at all if I'm going to be in the way." He looked at her with his keen blue eyes. He seemed kindly, but distant. But at least he was sane and wholesome, if even he looked thin and ill. A cough troubled him. "You have a cough," she said. "Nothing, a cold. The last pneumonia left me with a cough, but it's nothing." He kept distant from her and would not come any nearer. She went fairly often to the hut, in the morning or in the afternoon, but he was never there. No doubt he avoided her on purpose. He wanted to keep his own privacy. He had made the hut tidy, put the little table and chair near the fireplace, left a little pile of kindling and small logs, and put the tools and traps away as far as possible, effacing himself. Outside, by the clearing, he had built a low little roof of boughs and straw, a shelter for the birds, and under it stood the live coops. And one day when she came, she found 2 brown hens sitting alert and fierce in the coops, sitting on pheasants' eggs, and fluffed out so proud and deep in all the heat of the pondering female blood. This almost broke Connie's heart. She herself was so forlorn and unused, not a female at all, just a mere thing of terrors. And all the live coops were occupied by hens, 3 brown, and a grey and a black, all alike. They clustered themselves down on the eggs in the soft, nestling ponderously of the female urge, the female nurture, fluffing out their feathers, and with brilliant eyes they watched Connie as she crouched before them, and they gave short, sharp clucks of anger and alarm, but chiefly of female anger at being approached. Connie found corn in the corn bin in the hut. She offered it to the hens in her hand. They would not eat it. Only one hen pecked at her hand with a fierce little jab, so Connie was frightened. But she was pining to give them something. The brooding mothers who neither fed themselves nor drank. She brought water in a little tin and was delighted when one of the hens drank. Now she came every day to the hens. They were the only things in the world that warmed her heart. Clifford's protestation made her go cold from head to foot. Mrs. Bolton's voice made her go cold, and the sound of the businessmen who came. An occasional letter from Michaelese affected her with the same sense of chill. She felt she would surely die if it lasted much longer. Yet it was spring, and the bluebells were coming in the wood, and the leaf buds on the hazels were opening like the spatter of green rain. How terrible it was that it should be spring, and everything cold-hearted. Only the hens fluffed so wonderfully on the eggs, were warm with their hot, brooding female bodies. Connie felt herself living on the brink of fainting all the time. Then one day, a lovely sunny day, with the great tufts of primroses under the hazels and many violets dotting the paths. She came in the afternoon to the coops, and there was one tiny, perky chicken, timidly prancing round in front of the coop, and the mother hen clucking in terror. The slim little chick was greyish-brown with dark markings, and it was the most alive little spark of a creature in 7 kingdoms at that moment. Connie crouched to watch in a sort of ecstasy. Life, pure, sparky, fearless, new life, so tiny, and so utterly without fear. Even when it scampered a little, scrambling into the coop again, and disappeared under the hens' feathers in answer to the mother's hens' wild alarm cries, it was not really frightened. It took it as a game, the game of living. For in a moment, a tiny sharp head was poking through the gold-brown feathers of the hen, and eyeing the cosmos. Connie was fascinated, and at the same time never had she felt so acutely the agony of her own female forlornness. It was becoming unbearable. She had only one desire now, to go to the clearing in the wood. The rest was a kind of painful dream. But sometimes she was kept all day at Rugby, by her duties as a hostess. And then she felt as if she too were going blank, just blank and insane. One evening, guest or no guest, she escaped after tea. It was late, and she fled across the park like one who fears to be called back. The sun was setting rosy as she entered the wood. As she pressed on among the flowers, the light would last long overhead. She arrived at the clearing flushed and semi-conscious. The keeper was there, in his shirt sleeves, just closing up the coops for the night so the little occupants would be safe. But still, one little trio was pattering about on tiny feet, alert drab mites under the straw shelter, refusing to be called in by the anxious mother. "I had to come and see the chickens," she said, panting, glancing shyly at the keeper, almost unaware of him. "Are there any more?" 36 so far, he said. "Not bad." He took a curious pleasure in watching the young things come out. Connie crouched in front of the last coop. The 3 chicks had run in, but still their cheeky heads that came poking sharply through the yellow feathers, then withdrawing. Then only one beady little head eyeing forth from the vast mother body. "I'd like to touch them," she said, putting her fingers gingerly through the bars of the coop. But the mother hen pecked at her hand fiercely, and Connie drew back, startled and frightened. "How she pecks at me! She hates me," she said in a wondering voice. "But I wouldn't hurt them." The man, standing above her, laughed and crouched down beside her, knees apart, and put his hand with quiet confidence slowly into the coop. The old hen pecked at him, but not so savagely, and slowly, softly, with sure, gentle fingers. He felt among the old bird's feathers and drew out a faintly peeping chick in his closed hand. "There," he said, holding out his hand to her. She took the little drab thing between her hands, and there it stood, on its impossible little stalks of legs, its atom of balancing life trembling through its almost weightless feet into Connie's hands. But it lifted its handsome, clean-shaped little head boldly, and looked sharply round, and gave a little peep. "So adorable, so cheeky," she said softly. The keeper, squatting beside her, was also watching an amused face, the bold little bird in her hands. Suddenly, he saw a tear fall onto her wrist, and he stood up and stood away, moving to the other coop. For suddenly, he was aware of the old flame shooting and leaping up in his loins, that he had hoped was poisoned forever. He fought against it, turning his back to her, but it leapt and leapt downwards, circling in his knees. He turned again to look at her. She was kneeling and holding her 2 hands slowly forward blindly, so that the chicken should run into the mother hen again, and there was something so mute and forlorn in her. Compassion flamed in his bowels for her. Without knowing, he came quickly towards her and crouched beside her, taking the chick from her hands because she was afraid of the hen, and putting it back in the coop at the back of his loins. The lair suddenly darted stronger. He glanced apprehensively at her. Her face was averted, and she was crying blindly. In all the anguish of her generation's forlornness, his heart melted suddenly, like a drop of fire, and he put out his hand and laid his fingers on her knee. Oh, he laid his fingers on her knee. You must listen to the next video of Lady Chatterley's Lover. Listen to the next video of Lady Chatterley's Lover with me, Morel. I'll see you in the next video.